Hello and welcome to Purple Shirt History. This video will be on the League of Nations in the 1930s. It's a continuation of the previous video, League of Nations in the 1920s, but it's going to be a bit grimmer. There were no real successes for the League of Nations, which was the predecessor of the current United Nations. So as you watch this video, know that it's going to end badly. This is the third video for the AS International option, and China and Japan will be the final section, which we'll do next time. The first item on today's agenda is how did the rise of extremism affect international relations? Looking at the 1930s, we see the rise of very nationalist leaders, far-right leaders such as Hitler and Mussolini and the powers in Japan. So all of these countries, by pursuing a more imperialistic, nationalistic course, would try to damage the League of Nations. The second point is, why did the League of Nations fail to keep the peace in the 1930s? After the onset of the Great Depression, the League was extremely weakened. Every country tried to look out for itself, and the spirit of international cooperation and optimism faded. Countries like Japan and Italy sought imperialism to get resources and jumpstart their economies that were suffering under the Great Depression. The third item, why and with what effect did Britain and France pursue a policy of appeasement? Appeasement can be defined as a policy of making concessions to an aggressor in order to avoid conflict or war. Over the course of the 1930s, Hitler is going to gamble in a number of international events, and each time he gambles, the stakes are raised. No appeasement was going to stop Hitler from his dreams of empire and Lebensraum by overtaking Eastern Europe. The last item, why did war break out in 1939? The green light for World War II is the Nazi-Soviet pact. So all of the steps that lead up to that are very important, but all the chess pieces are in place with the Molotov-von Ribbentrop Pact, otherwise known as the Nazi-Soviet Pact. We will get into that a bit later. Looking at the impact of the Great Depression on political ideologies, starting with Germany, the Germans only had about 10 years of experience in democracy, and they were not quite happy with it. All the upheaval after World War I led to a very volatile political situation, and when there was tough times, the parties who shouted the loudest and had the most radical ideas were able to get followers. Impact on the rise of dictatorships on relations between powers. Mussolini is the first fascist leader in Europe, and he's pretty much the template for many people. Hitler learns a lot from him. Franco is helped put into power by Mussolini. Mussolini is very responsible for weakening the League of Nations. I would say if there was one person who you can say did the most damage to the League of Nations, it was by far Benito Mussolini. Now, as more dictators become rulers in Europe and Asia, we see the reformation of blocs. So just like there was the alliance system in World War I, we'll start to see the Allies and Axis powers take shape, with Britain and France on one side and Germany and Italy on the other side. Stalin is the wild card in this situation. He tries making alliances with these different countries, but in the end, we will see that Stalin will be attacked by Hitler, and this will make him become allies with Britain and France. The third bullet point talks about the Spanish Civil War from 1936 to 1939. Foreign responses were varied. Hitler and Mussolini really saw this as a dress rehearsal for World War II. Hitler was able to test out his new weapons, his new tactics, blitzkrieg, using the Luftwaffe to bomb cities like Guernica, whereas Mussolini was trying to really make his troops battle ready as quote-unquote volunteers to gain experience for future war. Britain and France are very hesitant to get involved in the Spanish Civil War. Stalin does provide some weapons and material support for the Republicans, but it is very limited and is not enough to turn the tide of war. In terms of America, Britain and France, the democracies, they do not get directly involved, although some of their citizens decide to volunteer and fight for the Republic. Aims and impact of Hitler's expansionist policies. If you've taken IGCSE, which I'd assume you would if you're taking A-level history, All of these things are in Chapter 3 of IGCSE, Steps to World War II. You remember the rearmament, first in secret, then in public at the Nuremberg rally. Remilitarization of the Rhineland, which was, in my opinion, that's the critical moment. Had Hitler been stopped there, generals in the German army like Beck could have been able to possibly overthrow Hitler and have some kind of new regime that was not as extreme as the Nazi one. But we shall never know. That's just speculation. What you do need to know is that the remilitarization is a major win for Hitler, and it makes it somewhat impossible for him to be removed politically. By not standing up to Hitler when they had an overwhelming firepower advantage, Britain and France missed a big opportunity to stop this escalatory spiral by Hitler. Anschluss, 1938, is the annexation of Austria. It was attempted in 1934, but blocked by Mussolini. Now Hitler is much more powerful than Mussolini through the rearmament campaign, and Mussolini must accept that Austria will become part of the German Reich. Sudetenland is a masterclass by Hitler of lying and gaslighting and playing the Western powers for fools, saying that he just wants the German speakers of the Sudetenland, which is the border regions between Czechoslovakia and Germany. The democratic leaders, especially Chamberlain, were willing to sacrifice Czechoslovakia to prevent war, but this just accelerated war, as Hitler was always going to take all of the Sudetenland and then Czechoslovakia if the Western powers were unwilling to defend it. After the embarrassment of the Munich conference about the Sudetenland and the annexation of Czechoslovakia, Poland was going to be the next target. And in the meantime, at least, Chamberlain did increase spending for the UK military, especially for the Royal Air Force and the Royal Navy. Now all the table is set for World War II, which began with the invasion of Poland on September 1st, 1939. Factors of appeasement were economic and military. Looking at the economics, it is the Great Depression. Britain has a lot of unemployment. They do not have sufficient resources, they think, to maintain the British Empire and to rearm for another massive conflict with Germany. So this is a huge reason for appeasement. They want to keep the British Empire intact. Militarily, they want to avoid war. They have fresh memories, as do the French, of all the carnage of World War I. Britain is not a traditional land power. They rely on the Royal Navy and this new thing called the Royal Air Force, which is a new branch of service that really advanced greatly from World War I. So militarily, Germany, with their rearmaments made public in the Nuremberg rally in 1935, Britain is behind Germany in this arms race. Stalin is always lurking in the background during the 1930s. The Soviet Union is pursuing this insane industrialization project, which is constructing cities literally from nothing in the Siberian hinterlands of the Soviet Union. So places like Magnitogorsk are these artificial towns that are based around natural resources, so they can extract those resources and turn it into weaponry. At first, Stalin is trying to get an alliance with Britain and France. That doesn't work out quite well. Eventually, we'll see the Nazi-Soviet Pact, which is signed by Stalin's foreign minister, Vyacheslav Molotov. And what this pact does is give Stalin time, because he knows the eventual blitzkrieg is going to come, but he needs as much time as possible to create weapons and make the Soviet Union as ready as it can be for the German invasion. In hindsight, it looks like appeasing Hitler was foolishness. Well, it was. But there were good reasons for it. They thought if they gave him a few things, he would surely stop. If they allowed him to break agreements, he would eventually stop. They tried to reason with an unreasonable man. So this was a giant mistake, and this is the faulty premise of appeasement. But looking at all the different aspects of the march to World War II, we see that these mistakes are made by Western leaders repeatedly. Well, appeasement does not work. It never has worked, and it never will work. So this was the fruit of the appeasement of Hitler, World War II. The near final stages of the steps to World War II were Czechoslovakia and the Munich crisis. Czechoslovakia is a Slavic country. There are Germans there, but they were traditionally Bohemia. Even when it was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, these are Slavic lands. British rearmament really focuses around the Royal Navy and the RAF. So the Royal Air Force had two amazing planes. One was called the Spitfire and another one was called the Hurricane. And these planes were made in great number in order to prevent Germany from gaining air superiority over Britain, which could possibly lead to an invasion of the British Isles. We start to see the popularization of a new form of economics called Keynesian economics, using debt to stimulate spending and stimulate the military in Britain at the time. John Maynard Keynes is the name of the famous economist. Why did World War II break out in 1939? Why wasn't it in 1938 or 1940 or 41? Well, the Nazi-Soviet pact is the main reason. It gives both dictators, Hitler and Stalin, something that they desperately want. For Stalin, it's time to make an agreement with Hitler so he can continue to build and industrialize the military-industrial complex in the Soviet Union. For Hitler, he prevents a two-front war. He knows if he invades Poland, then France and Britain could attack him from one side. He didn't want to deal with the Soviets attacking him on the other. So he makes the deal with Stalin to make sure that he's able to invade Poland without any interference from the Soviets. They actually divide Poland between each other. Stalin gets half of Poland and the Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, while Germany gets half of Poland. Key things to understand for the League of Nations in the 1930s is that it's abject failure in this decade. There are no successes. The primary objective of keeping peace shatters, and we have World War II in 1939. In the 1920s, there are successes and failures, but in the 30s, it all falls apart. Again, Manchuria and Abyssinia are your two big case studies. Please know them very well. The Great Depression led to extremism. It led to the breakdown of international cooperation. Places like Japan and Germany were export-based economies. Once other countries put up massive tariff barriers, meaning it cost way more money to bring those products into the country for consumers, and people stopped buying those things, it was definitely a blow to those countries and massively hit the confidence of the leadership of Japan and Germany. The Weimar government would fall in early 1930s. Hitler would take over power in 1933, and Japan would continue to fall under the sway of the military, with Japan basically becoming a military dictatorship in this decade. Since the beginning of the League, there were big problems. The USA wasn't a member. There were structural problems with vetoes, being able to paralyze the whole resolution-making process. But at least there was some optimism and some let's give it a try attitude in the 1920s. By the 30s, with the failures of Manchuria and Abyssinia, we see people no longer believe that this institution is a viable way to keep peace in the world, and they start going into a more self-interested direction. UK and France lost faith in the League. Both countries were very concerned with maintaining their empires, and they simply couldn't split their attention between their self-interests and the needs of the League.